or way another person feels and acts is not your responsibility. It is their responsibility.
Welcome, men, to another episode of the Resisting Beta podcast. I am Andrew Bontz. I'm your host. I'm guiding you along this journey today. So we have George Wilkinson with us, and he is going to help us answer some key questions that I have for him that we'll get to, or we may not get to, depending on how the conversation goes. But here are a few things after looking at his book on questions that I have. So what are the steps to self-leadership, and what exactly is self-leadership? I think I have a general understanding of it, but I always like to kind of define it, because I think people use words but don't necessarily define what they mean to them. So I'm kind of curious what that means to George. And how do we get out of our rut? You know that moment when you're like disconnected or just kind of floating in existing, like you've moved away from a mission or purpose, or you have a lot of questions of like, why am I even here? Why am I doing this stuff? Like, what's the point? You know, those like I like to call it the case of the fuckets sometimes. So, you know, that something's missing, but you can't quite figure it out. Like, how do you like navigate out of that? And George is an expert in helping men do that. So how do we embrace failure and position ourselves to thrive afterwards? So a little bit about George. George is a coach. He works particularly with men who've really lost their motivation and feel a little bit lost inside, and they're kind of meandering through life. So he's an author of a great book on self-leadership called Thrive, and he's a founder of his new course under the same name. So George, I really appreciate you being here and investing your time to help the men listening to the podcast today.
No problem, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here, actually.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I mean, you have a really cool story, and you're kind of documenting your story of transformation. So I'd love you to share just like the Reader's Digest version of the event that caused the transformation in your life, and kind of before and after, and walk us through just to kind of give a general gist of where you're at.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so really it goes back much further than the event itself, and the fact that my background really is I was kind of ex-forces, and spent 7 years in the British Royal Navy, and funnily enough I spent 3 years in the States during that time, which was a great experience. But for one reason or another I decided to leave. I kind of fell into at the time the IT environment, and whether it was part of my training, you know, the institution of the forces, etc., you know, wanting to do the best job that you could, trying to be an outstanding performer, or at least a good performer, you know, I kind of found myself in a bit of a rut in the fact that you know, I tried to do my best in the workplace, and I found myself really in a position where kind of 2014 that I was working more hours. I was in a position where my back was up against the wall. I couldn't change my habits. I was, you know, reasonably overweight at the time, and I mean, so much so. I mean, a great example would be I was working on one particular project where I stopped working in the workplace at 2:00 in the morning, so 2 a.m. Drove down the motorway, the freeway in the US, home, crashed out for 3-4 hours, and then back in the workplace for a 7:30 meeting the next day, or that day, the same day, which is completely ridiculous. So that was kind of my behaviour at the time. And then I have had some back issues in the past, and I was actually in training for a swim, a charity swim, and I was getting a more back issues than normal, and a lot more pain than normal. So I was just trying to sustain it and push through it with painkillers, etc. Not really changing my ways, probably pushing harder and harder actually. And then I knew there was an issue, so I was seeing a physiotherapist, and funnily enough, I was in the dentist chair when my back actually prolapsed, and I knew there was an issue because there was a massive amount of pain, and as we were saying earlier, that I've never given birth to a kid, and I'm sure that's painful, and I've heard stories about it being painful, but this was unbearable, to the point where the pain increased so much that I ended up on the floor. I couldn't get up, I couldn't walk, I couldn't crawl, I couldn't do anything basically. I could just move my arms and move my head around, really. It was that bad. I ended up, being rushed to a hospital by ambulance, and one thing led to another. But I can remember waiting for an X-ray, because I was throwing painkillers in my throat. I prescribed painkillers, from the hospital, and so the pain managed to subside. I was on a drip. I was in a morphine drip at one point, and I can remember laying there thinking in the hospital, how on earth have I ended up in this position? How have I got to this kind of state? And that took really, although I had that thought, and that thought is still crystal clear in my mind, it really kick-started a journey of trying to become more self-aware and trying to be objective about the situation that I'd put myself in. I realised it was my fault, and that was really the Kickstarter for me on a journey of self-discovery, and actually to sort of push forward and do something along similar lines for men out there that might be in a similar position or even worse.
So after you went through that transformation and you said you hired a coach, yeah, right, to kind of start diagnosing, like, okay, what got me to where I'm at and how do I push past it, right? So what were some of the first initial steps that you started to get a lot of value from as you moved into the direction of coaching, and what did he guide you through?
Yeah, I knew I was looking for something. I reached out to, what I actually did at the time was I reached out to the Tony Robbins movement, and I remember talking to a guy from the US, and that whole experience was a kind of an introduction to the whole thing, and the idea was to basically sell a package to you. And he really stopped me in my tracks. It made me think. And although I experienced coaching back in 2007, because that's when I went to my first coaching course, and I used to coach people in the workplace. The challenging questions from him were really making me think. So anyway, I ended up with a guy from the UK, and that journey was, I just laid everything out. Everything was spilling out. I thought, well, I've invested in this. I realised that I need to do something. I don't quite know where I'm going to end up. I know where I am. I know the kind of crap situation I'm in at the moment. But I was kind of putting everything on his lap to try and solve my problem. And really what started to happen over the next 2 to 3 months, our sessions were quite intense for definitely the first sort of 5 or 6 weeks, or 5 or 6 sessions rather, where so much so, it felt like I was crawling around in the dirt in my life and in my own mind. And really what started to happen by about maybe session 7, 8, 9 is I started to become quite self-aware, and he allowed me, through clever questions and me being very vulnerable and sharing everything, because I think that's really where you've got to be. If you've got to, I coach now, but if you're gonna work with someone and you're going to invest with them your time and your money, etc., in order for them to help you, you just got to lay it on the line, basically. You just got to be upfront, and that's what I did. All right, okay, element of trust needs to come out of it. In the fact, if you don't know someone, there is an element of trust in opening out slowly. So probably by session 7, 8, 9, I was in that position, and I really started to view things objectively, and I knew that, because I had this trust in this guy at the time, that he was managing to improve my life. I could start to see changes, and that's when I got to the position that I need to give back. His name was Danny, and I said, Danny, I need to give back somehow. And that's where we, through coaching process, we actually come up with the idea of a book. And that's when I started to write the book. And it was just in its infancy. It was rubbish, the first shitty draft, basically. I mean, I was given early copies to my wife to review, and she was saying, what's all this about? But it was just a brain dump. But it then started to take form and shape and everything. And I got a couple of chapters ready, and I managed to secure a publisher. And I was over the moon, and that was it. And from that point forward, I was completely committed.
So you talk about the 7 steps. I think that I want to get to the point where maybe we get a kind of a review of the 7 steps. I don't want to dive into all of them, because I want the guys listening to dive in and read your book. But maybe like get a general overview of them, and I'd really like to kind of pick one to dive a little bit deeper into. Maybe the one that you feel like men get the most aha moments from, or the one that slaps them in the face the most, that kind of stuff, or maybe the one that slapped you in the face the most, right? So what's the general overview of the steps you talk about in the book?
So, I mean, the steps originate from my experience. So they originally started out about 12 steps, and they went back into 7. And the core of the book, there's a great picture in the first few pages of the book of the relationship of the 7 steps. And in the middle, there's the step, emotional mastery. And I've got to be honest with you, during my growth process, my progression working with Danny, with my coach at the time, I was going through a lot of change, and I was learning at the same time. So I had to do a certain amount of research for the book as well, because I was going through this process of learning, understanding, growing, etc. But it became obvious to me that really, through research and then self-reflection, that actually emotional mastery, the mastery of our emotions, a very, very difficult thing to do. But if we can get to a point where, because fundamentally the first part of the brain that's formed, the oldest part of the brain, is the limbic system. And our limbic system basically drives our emotions, and our emotions drive everything. And we're driven in life through emotion. Anger, love, hatred, lust, jealousy, whatever it may be. Our emotions are driving our actions and our behavior. So to me, that's the strongest part of the book. Now, to use the phrase emotional mastery is a little bit glib in the fact that, in order to master your emotions, what do you need to do, and who do you need to become? A, you need to become a different person. B, to master emotions completely, it's possibly impossible, but to gain a much better control and awareness of your emotions is fundamental. I mean, if you can just get to a point where you can sit back and reflect on how you behave in life, and what you like about your behavior, what you dislike about your behavior, and even if you can get to the position where you can monitor how you're behaving, and maybe when a situation happens, if you overreact, you just observe that, monitor that, and in the moment try to correct it. If you can even get to that position in its infancy, then you're starting to regulate and master your emotions. So me, that particular chapter in the book took 5 months. 5 to 5.5 months to actually develop that particular area, and it's in the heart of the book for a particular reason, and the fact that it's such a key driver in our lives.
So, emotional mastery, I hear the word mastery. What would you say are some of the practices? Because to become a master of something, you have to practice, right? So, what are some of the key practices that maybe on a daily basis or a situational basis that you used, or maybe that you use with your clients or your coach used with you that helped you develop the kind of the reps, right? Put in the reps to start mastering your ability to handle your emotions.
Really good. It's a really good question, and I think that in terms of trying to take something like that into something that's practical, you need to be aware of things like emotional intelligence. So where you've got IQ, you've also got EQ, emotional quotient. You can assess your emotional intelligence, and the thing is, your emotional intelligence grows. It grows, through your life. A 5-year-old child and a 25-year-old man. The 25-year-old man is automatically, unless there's any mental challenges there. Traditionally, for the average man, average woman, they're going to become more emotionally intelligent gradually anyway, because they're going to learn. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to try not to repeat those mistakes, hopefully. But key kind of aspects is awareness is one of them. Is to try and be aware, both in a social setting and also a personal setting. To be aware, and then to try and regulate your emotions. And I'll give you a great example. I mean, my daughter actually has learning difficulties, so she knows, she's got coping mechanisms, and one of those coping mechanisms is, even in her mental condition, she realizes that if she goes too far, she has to take time out. So if she gets too angry, she realizes she has to take time out. So it's simple things like that actually help to regulate our emotions. In addition to that, are things like around our boundaries, to actually understand how we're acting and how we're behaving. So simple things like, if you look at your calendar, look at your diary, effectively, however you can run your working or business life or your personal life, just to be aware and conscious of how much time you're committing to other people, how much time to committing to yourself, how much time you're committing to exercise. And on the back of exercise is a great way of injecting, some serious hormones into your system to actually, endorphins, to actually help to fill you up and enrich how you feel. And another great way is to practice things like meditation or even mindfulness in order to actually then regulate your emotions. And acts such as taking responsibility. One thing that we don't do in life, until we become self-aware, until we start to mature, is about responsibility. It's taking responsibility to things for your actions and taking ownership. When you screw up, if you take responsibility for that and ownership of that then builds your character. That then provides a learning experience where hopefully you won't repeat it. So, it's an easy question, but it's actually a complex answer. And I would say, to sum it all up, responsibility is key, exercise is key, and acts such as mindfulness and meditation are all key factors, and that self-awareness are all key factors that you can build into your routine in order to start, improving yourself. But it's like anything, Andrew, that if you go into it, you can actually do assessments in terms of your emotional intelligence. You can actually take courses and how to prove your emotional intelligence. So it kind of depends how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Yeah, I think that many men, we don't necessarily spend a lot of time in ability to describe our emotions, right? I think that the versatility of our emotions and the ability to just be present and sit, like, how am I actually feeling? Because it seems like most people, it's like angry, sad, happy, right? Like very basic type, second grade emotions where they have those little smiley faces. I think of my daughter's kindergarten room where they have the different faces stuck up on the wall. It's like, which face are you? And I think that would be useful for many men towards, it's like, are you angry? Are you frustrated? What are you? And being able to assess, because I think one word that you've been using a lot is aware. And me being the marketing person, like the goal of a marketing person is to take people from unaware to problem aware. They're aware of the problem. And then we want to take them from problem aware to solution aware, towards like you're aware of the problem and you're aware of kind of how to solve it, right? So guiding people through that from a marketer and marketing psychology is what I do. But for ourselves, it's important. I think there's something to reflect upon for us as men towards like, okay, well, first you kind of have to be aware. Like, okay, I'm having a hard time in my work relationship or any relationship. When I get angry, I say shit I shouldn't. Or when I get embarrassed, I say stuff I shouldn't. When prideful, I do things I shouldn't do, So all of these different, when I get embarrassed, all of these things, when I get fearful, figuring out and just doing a self-assessment of, okay, well, how do I react to that? And what are the facts and what are the evidence that I can look at in both my work relationships, my personal relationships, and what is that telling me? And what do I want to do about it? I think that, and then once you figure that out, okay, now what do I do? Like, and it's practicing in those moments of, okay, well, in moments of, like for me, conflict, right? Like I'm a recovering nice guy, not wanting to lean into conflict, confrontation, those sort of things, and leaning into that. So after all of those things I just mentioned, what advice can you give to men to start down this path of, now that they're kind of aware of this, like where do we want to take them next, George?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit some really good points, and one of the key points you've hit on is actually men and emotion. Men, men being emotional, and men realizing they have emotions, and happy, angry, sad, etc. That kind of simplifies things. I think men need to realize that the power of the emotional brain is incredible. It can drive a lot of behavior. So that understanding, that recognition, that appreciation that the limbic part of the brain is very, very powerful and can drive them a whole variety of directions. So that kind of understanding and appreciation is probably a good thing. And to realize and to reflect that, okay, all right, so maybe I'm a bit more of a complex character than I actually think. Maybe sometimes I do hold in some difficult emotions and I don't actually manage to display them or discuss them or share them or even admit to myself this is how I feel. So I think that reflection, the appreciation and the understanding of a range of emotions, and as I just hit a minute ago, is just to admit to us how we feel and to be honest with ourselves and trust in ourselves with respect to our emotions, and then it'll be a case of actually, what do we do next in our context? What do we want to have happen? How do we want to behave in certain situations? So for example, if you reflect and say, for argument's sake, you get angry and you realize you get angry and you admit to yourself, you maybe don't share it, I get angry. What do you decide you want to do about it? Where do you want to take that anger? How will you manage that anger next time it actually happens? So by planning and thinking ahead, you can then try and at least maybe not get angry, but try to mitigate the anger, to try and manage that situation, and to be honest with yourself. And obviously, the perfect scenario really is finding someone that you can trust and starting to share your thoughts and your feelings around your emotions. Maybe not, open the floodgates straight away, but even just to start that process off. And it can be a tough one for men. I was chatting to a potential client the other day, and he had taken several months just to get to the point where he picked up the phone and spoke to me. And that can be tough for men. So it is a hurdle. It is a real hurdle to get over. But if you can admit to yourself and trust in someone else and just try to share your emotions. And I think every man has a problem with it in some respect. It just depends to what degree.
So I think that one thing that I really want to highlight in what you said was the ownership. Because I think that when you hear people talk, there's a lot of victim mindset in emotions, where it's, she makes me so angry, she makes me so frustrated, he bothers me. And I put words of caution around that. When you find yourself saying things like that, you're giving the power to the other person, right? You are the victim. They are in control. And I think as men, for us to lead, we need to be in a position of control. And first, it's controlling the narrative in my head. And that's where this practice of stoicism and studying stoicism has had a huge impact on my life, to where it's like, nobody has control over my emotions but me. And if I give them control, that was also on me. I have to own that. Yeah. It's not their fault. It is within my control. I can't control what happens to me, but I can control how I react to it. And how I react to it is going to dictate my emotions, right? Ooh. So from a sequence of events to where if someone cuts me off in traffic, that guy's an asshole, and now he makes me so mad, I'm going to tailgate him, I'm going to road rage, and it's going to ruin half of my day. Or, that person's in a hurry, maybe someone's sick in their life, So being able to kind of control those micro moments and the narratives based off of a sequence of events and your reaction to them is so key here in owning, at least documenting, like, oh, okay, what happened? What are the facts? What caused this feeling? And what can I control? And that's one of the things where I like that you pointed out, to where what you can control, finding a trusted person to talk to them about that and say some stuff out loud. And as you start saying stuff out loud, you start to have some realizations of like, wow, that's actually not that big of a deal. I don't know why I reacted that way, because now that I say it out loud, it's kind of silly. I feel kind of like an idiot, So what are some of like the benefits of having self-mastery that you found now from where you're at today compared to where you were before you started this journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that, I'll be the first to admit, and like everyone should really, is that we're all on a journey effectively, and I'm definitely a student of life. So although I can manage and regulate my emotions in a much better position than I was several years ago, I'm still on a journey like everyone else. So that's the first thing, I don't want to come across as someone who's, it has mastered everything. I'm on a journey myself. But one thing I found is that the net result of starting to manage your emotions and take responsibility for your emotions, and also realizing, which is connected to what you were saying a few minutes ago, Andrew, is that when another person feels and acts is not your responsibility. It is their responsibility, and they're behaving because that's the way they want to behave, or the way they feel they need to behave. Just that level of awareness now is a complete contradiction to where I was, say, 7 or 8 years ago, where I was just caught up in the moment, caught up in the flux of life, had no objectivity. I didn't create any kind of healthy barriers around my emotions. I didn't actually realize that maybe I can catch myself if I'm angry or I'm displaying some sort of emotion and try and regulate that. I didn't appreciate that. Just caught up in the moment, just suffering the consequences as a result of it, and not thinking objectively at all. Not at all. And to the point where, emotions drive your behavior, and my behavior was frankly just, it was in the gutter. I was just being swept along with life, not being objective, and not actually giving myself the self-love, effectively. Because a lot of it comes down to that is, and I think for men, when you start to talk about love and self-love, whoa, crikey, what's all that about? But, we need to realize that we need to sometimes act in certain ways, behave in certain ways, gain that level of awareness and self-management in order to look after ourselves, in order to be our best friends. Because if we can't be best friends with ourselves, if we can't be honest with ourselves, then we're on a spot of bother there.
Yeah, I mean it sets me up with an idea of a realization that I had in the last year, where I am a big advocate and I study kind of the love languages from a romantic relationship, but I had never quite made the connection to what if I followed the love language stuff for myself. Like if I truly want to build my self-confidence up, if I truly want to rise on how I see my own value and how it connects to me as a man and my mission in this world, why don't I follow the love language that I would expect out of a partner that makes me feel loved and apply that to myself? And it really got me thinking along the lines of like, oh, okay, so it gave me some practical understanding of like love languages, but applying it inward. And it's not super like woo, like giving yourself hugs and that kind of stuff, but it's mainly what one of my love languages is physical touch, and the other ones is words of affirmation. So when my partner says they believe in me, or they're so proud of me, or that they love the value I bring to their life, that kind of stuff really gets me all the warm, funny, fuzzy feeling, But like, how often do we do that for ourselves? How often, if you like receiving gifts as a love language, how often do you give yourself that and show yourself that love and that kind of stuff? So I think for me that paradigm shift really started to pull it away from kind of like the woo, like hoo, moment to, oh, holy crap. I have this version of me that is kind of a self-masochist. I don't know if it's because I'm Catholic or whatever, but sometimes I go through life and I need to give myself 10 lashes for for doing something or saying something or not doing something or not being at a certain place in life, or all these different components that when you start going down the rabbit hole of beating the hell out of yourself for whatever day of the week it is on whatever topic, holy crap, can you just like take yourself from a good day to a real shit day, you know? So, hey man, I really appreciate this conversation so far. And I know that you cover a lot of this in the book. So what I want to do is kind of get to, I have to kind of round this episode out, and I want to leave the men wanting more so they can buy your book, certainly. So the one question that I ask every single guest is, what does it mean to be a man to you?
Oh, crikey, what a good question. What does it mean to be a man to me? Well, taking ownership for my life, taking responsibility, owning up to my strengths and owning up to my weaknesses, and understanding my values and understanding that that's driving my behavior. The men, I think, men are, in terms of actually, in terms of a group, it's challenging for men these days. It's challenging in this 21st century, fast-paced environment, a change in dynamics between male and female, which is definitely going on. We can't hide that. And for me, it's about appreciating my masculinity. I am a man. That's my position, basically. Owning up to my values and carrying that forward to help and support other people.
Man, I love a lot of what you said there. I think that especially when men go through like identity changes and something shifts in their life and their values start to slip. And if you don't have a coach or a group of really close friends who understand your values and who you're trying to strive to be as a man, it's pretty easy to hide behind certain veils of, okay, well, I could, you give your values lip service, but what are your actions saying? Like, what are you doing? Are they backing that up right now in your life? Or do you just tell other people to do it, but you don't follow your own damn advice? And I can't answer that question for you, but I bet you know the answer. And maybe it's time to take a little self-reflection, and maybe this connects to the next question here. So, George, I want you to put on your professorial hat here, and I want you to help get the men some quick wins. I want you to help them get some momentum to move them from the rut that they are in, to move them from the stuck, to move them from the point of wandering to closer to the best version of themselves. And connected to the topic that we talked about today, what is one thing that they can do every single day for the next 7 days that would be baby steps to kind of get them some quick wins in their life?
Okay. Well, what they should do is they should take some time out in their day, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and self-reflect on who they are and where they're going and what they want to achieve at life, and get to that position over that week of being honest with themselves. Even writing it out, how they feel, where they are, and really being honest with themselves. And a great way of doing that is handwriting, just longhand, not typing it up, just that self-expression. And get to the end of that week and reflect back on who they were on day 1 and who they are now on day 7, and realize the difference, and congratulate themselves on anything, any realizations, any understandings, any honesty, any appreciation of how they've changed over that week, and realize in that change there is potential for so much more growth.
Man, Man, I love that, because I think that when you start writing stuff down, you can start turning feelings and emotions into facts and logic, right? If you can make that transition, you can actually instigate true change. But if you're just relying on like, this is how I feel today, or this is where my emotions are right now. And sometimes men can take this, there are men who are too emotional, where once the pendulum has swung too far, where our father's generation, they didn't show any emotion. And there are some men today who show way too much, and it turns off people around them, whether it be their spouse or other men or in the work office or whatever. And you got to be who you are. But I think that's such a neat tool and tactic to start documenting, pick a lane and just start writing it down. It's like, okay, well, if it's anger you're struggling with, if it's conflict, if it's passivity, if it's any of those things, where it's like, okay, well, let's just do like a little bit of a journal audit for 7 days and write down these experiences and see how you improve. Because I know for me, like if you're trying to lose weight, if I start tracking what I eat, my eating gets better. Funny enough.
And the trick here is what's happening is we're making it objective. And if you reflect and look upon that, if you wrote something you don't like it, how do you feel about that? What do you think about it? You get that sense of objectivity. Instead of, going back to where I was in 2016, just in the throw of life, not being objective. That reflection and that objectivity, as you say, you start charting your weight and you start losing weight because you're starting to take some control and you're starting to be conscious about what you're doing. That is, that for some people is just in itself is a great self-realization.
I think that's just really key here, because it allows you to start practicing being a leader of your own life in other areas, in an area that needs leadership that you're lacking right now. And this will tell you, and especially as you repeat it over 7 days, and then that continues to 21, and that turns into a whole year. Like, imagine the growth that you could experience from becoming and reaching towards the best version of you, and not just giving it lip service, but actually putting daily practice behind it. So I really appreciate that, George. So now if the men want to continue this conversation and they want to check out your book, I think it's on Amazon right now. I found it on there. They can find it on your website too. I'll add your website to your show notes. Is your website the best way to connect with you, or LinkedIn, or what's the best way to kind of...
LinkedIn's probably the best way to connect with me, actually. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll add George's information to the show notes, so you guys can follow him on LinkedIn and continue this conversation. And if you want to get some help with that, George helps men with these transformations through his coaching service. I'd certainly buy his book, get a feel and flavor for George. And if he's your kind of dude, you think can help you along, take a look at his coaching. So, George, do you have any other parting wisdom as we send the men off on their day today?
Yeah, I think guys, you got to just be honest with yourself. I mean, that's probably the most important thing. If you're going through challenge, you go through issues, whether it be relationships with your partner, relationships with work, whatever it may be, take some time out and be honest. Be your own best friend. Because if you can't trust yourself, if you can't be honest with yourself, who can you be honest with? Because that honesty will direct good behavior. It will definitely improve things moving forward, without a shadow of a doubt.
Hey, George, I really appreciate you being here. I just want to honor you for a second because I enjoy it, one. And two, I think the men have really benefited from your choice to stick your neck out there and document your journey and start putting the pen to paper, take the initial hard choice and ask for help. Ask for the coaching, put your ego aside, and to seek out somebody who has been there before you, that's a few steps ahead of the journey, and continuing to move forward and advance in advance. And also having the humble nature of like, you know what, I'm still in a journey too here, right? I'm still moving along. I'm not perfect. And I really appreciate that approach too. So thank you so much for the amount of work that you invested into yourself and for the ripple effect that not only are you having with the men listening today, but in the impact you have with your book and your one-on-one coaching. So I really appreciate you as a man and what you're doing.
Well, thanks very much, Andrew, and I genuinely do appreciate the opportunity. And I think that, there's a lot being discussed, and for any men that are listening, if they can just take one or two things away from today, start to move forward, then they're on a path at least, and they're taking that first step.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, George.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, I'll end it there. So we're at the end of the episode. So what I'll do is give you the floor here in a second. What I want you to do is essentially just kind of create a movie trailer for the episode. So, and mainly answering the question, men, why should men listen to this episode? So typically how it looks is, hey, I'm George Wilkinson. I coach men. You can insert your tagline. In this episode, you should listen to this episode because that kind of stuff. So whenever you're ready, you can just off the cuff, give it a shot.
Cool. I mean, one of the reasons why you should listen to this episode is the fact that, like a lot of men out there, I've been on a journey myself. I was in a very difficult position a few years ago, and I actually managed to stick my neck out and actually move forward. Now I take the opportunity to actually, I'm privileged to be able to help other men take that step forward. Become your own true friends, and be honest with yourself, and you're definitely on a path to self-leadership. Self-leadership, really, proving yourself is the best way forward. Good luck with your journey.
Awesome. All right. I will